أهلا ومرحبا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. أنا مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. أربط أحزمة الأمان، فمن المرجح أن يكون العام المقبل مختلفا عن أي عام آخر في التاريخ الأمريكي الحديث. قبل 8 سنوات بدأت فترة إدارة دونالد ترامب الأولى بالجدل والفوضى والاقتتال الداخلي. هل تتذكرون النماذج العديدة لحظر دخول مواطني الدول ذات الأغلبية المسلمة؟ وبعد مرور 8 سنوات نتوقع أن تستمر إدارته الثانية في إثارة الجدل، لكن الفوضى والاقتتال الداخلي قد يحل محلهما النظام والولايات. هناك أولويتان سنسمع عنهما كثيرا، وهما عمليتا الترحيل والرسوم الجمركية. وستكون هناك تغيرات كبيرة في السياسة بشأن قضايا ممتدة من أوكرانيا وإسرائيل في الخارج إلى الصحة والتعليم هنا في داخل. وسيكون هناك بالتأكيد العديد من المفاجآت، ولكن أجعلكم مستعدين للعام المقبل. يسعدني أن أرحب باللجنة من الخبراء السياسيين الحكماء ديفيد هوكينز وأنا جيراتيلي ودانيال ليبمان. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. It's dangerous to predict, but let's live on the edge. And let's take a look into our crystal ball for 2025. I'm delighted to have David Hawkins, Anna Giratelli, and Daniel Lippman to help with the predictions for what 2025 will bring. First, Trump's picks for high office. If one of them isn't the one to get through the Senate's advise and consent powers, who is that likely to be? Daniel?
Looks like Tulsi Gabbard may be having some trouble. She is Trump's pick to be Director of National Intelligence, which is a very important national security role. She would be coordinating how America's dozen plus intelligence agencies do their work. It was created after 9/11, but she has received lots of flack from people on Capitol Hill and in the national security establishment for how she has parroted Russian talking points about America's influence in the world and why Russia invaded Ukraine. She met with Bashar al-Assad, the ousted dictator of Syria, and most members of Congress would stay far away from these types of dictators. And in meetings on Capitol Hill, she hasn't really impressed a lot of senators in terms of her knowledge on intelligence and national security issues. And so she may face an uphill battle. And she's also a former Democrat, so there might not be a lot of tears shed among hardcore Republicans if she goes down.
Anybody else have a prediction on this? A member of Trump's team who won't make it into office?
I think that was the best prediction, but I still think that Pete Hegseth could wear out his welcome during the hearings. He of course, has gone from sort of twisting in the wind a few days ago to then the Trump team sort of unleashed the fury of grassroots support for him and scared some Republican senatorial skeptics. I think he might not wear well at the hearings. I think he's very good on TV, but he's also was good on TV because he said provocative things. And I think that he might say some provocative things at the hearings that could cause his, what now seems to be his stock back on the rise to peter out and stall again. But I'm with Daniel that Gabbard would be number one on the list.
All right, Anna, let me ask you, one of Donald Trump's chief priorities in terms of policy implementation is deportation. When you look into 2025, how do you think this idea is likely to get translated into reality?
Yeah, I just interviewed Tom Homan, who is the border czar for the incoming Trump administration this week. And Homan shared with me that they're planning to get started on day one, so on January 20th, starting with the deportations, not just starting to plan. And Homan told me that they're going to be starting nationwide, not just in sanctuary cities where the majority of people with criminal records are residing at this point, according to their estimates. But they're looking at getting started with people who have criminal histories. So, not necessarily people with criminal convictions, but people who have been arrested or charged, not yet convicted, as well as 1.4 million people who an immigration judge has ordered them to be deported, but they haven't been removed from the country yet.
So in total, when you add the people with criminal histories and the 1.4 million, what is the total number of this first tranche of deportations?
We're looking at about 2 million, which would be a really significant number. But it's about 20 to 15 to 20% of the total population that's believed to be undocumented right now.
And are we ready bureaucratically in terms of personnel and systems to deport these people? And where are we deporting them to?
Yeah, not my opinion, but no, we're not ready. To arrest one person, I've embedded with ICE in the past before, and they'll spend weeks tailing that person, trying to get a feel for their schedule, and then take 6 or 7 officers and arrest that person at the easiest place possible. It takes hours to make that happen. And so when you're thinking about 2 million people, 10,000 would be hard enough to say we're going to increase it by that much. But 2 million is a huge figure, so I'm not sure how they're going to make it happen. They're also looking at ways to detain people. If you're arresting them, you need to hold them in custody. ICE does not have the authority to just deport people. Every individual gets to go before an immigration judge who will then decide if he or she needs to be deported, and then ICE will carry it out. So you're looking at a long process, a lot of twists and turns that I don't think the Trump administration is ready for yet. They're certainly going to need a lot more funding from Congress.
So, Daniel, David, we just heard Anna describe what is just one of Donald Trump's policy priorities for 2025. If he tries to do what Anna, if the new administration tries to do what Anna just described, what impact will that have on everything else Donald Trump wants to accomplish in his first year back in the White House? Daniel?
Yeah, so I think some immigration hawks will be disappointed unless he gets every single illegal immigrant out of the country, which is just not realistic. So that's why they're saying they are prioritizing people with criminal records beyond just violating the law by getting into the country illegally. But if you have a huge wave of deportations, that could definitely hurt the economy. And that's what Trump's economic advisors tell him on a regular basis and have told him since day one of him being in public life, that a lot of these people are the backbone of landscaping and house building in America. We have a housing shortage in the country that people across the political spectrum are very concerned about. If you want, the hospitality industry, the restaurant industry, a lot of these people are cleaning dishes. And so if Americans want to go out to eat or get fresh fruit from California or avocados, the prices may increase if it's harder to get, if they have to spend much more on hiring Americans who are legal.
And David, what is likely to get crowded out of our public policy agenda if this takes center stage?
Well, that's a great question. I think the story of the first 6 months of 2025 is going to be no crowding out. It's going to be, everything everywhere all at once. I think Trump believes that he has a mandate. He seems to be a returning president in a big hurry, and I think that he's going to throw hit the gas on lots of different things. His economic agenda, tariffs, trying to get Congress to pass not one but two of these big budget bills called reconciliation, one with a tax cut, and hope that the onslaught of all this news will make some of his less successful things harder to notice. If he's doing 6 things a day that are vying to be the lead story on cable television or in the newspapers, the one that doesn't work might not get noticed as much. And of course, in the end, as Daniel and Anna know better than I, this mass deportation thing it isn't practical. It's a pipe dream. We can't get rid of what amounts to 3% of the U.S. population ever. They're not ever going away.
All right. Well, we're going to mark down that prediction. Now, Anna, when Trump was first president in his first term, the big news of his opening days had to do with what in retrospect we call euphemistically the Muslim ban, a set of declarations putting limitations on visas for immigrants from Muslim majority countries. And it went through various incarnations over time. Is the new president, the new old president, likely to try to execute a similar type of prohibition this time around?
We're actually not expecting that. We're certainly expecting it in other ways. And you're right with the one that imposed restrictions on 7 Muslim majority countries. What we are planning to see is President Trump bringing back Remain in Mexico, which was a program he created that required asylum seekers to live in Mexico and continue to reside there, often in tents, camps just set up along the border, waiting for their day to appear before a U.S. judge, rather than releasing people into the country and having them wait for years for that day in court. We're also expecting Trump to end the use of a phone app that is used by migrants in Mexico to schedule appointments with customs officers, and for other migrants in countries far away, 4 countries, to be paroled into the country and allowed to fly in commercially. So we are going to see a clamping down of who is being admitted into the United States for sure, just not in the way that he went about it 8 years ago.
Interesting. Very interesting. Daniel, one of the other big promises that Donald Trump has made for his opening shots back in the White House have to do with tariffs. We've seen him threaten tariffs on China. We've also seen him promise tariffs on our neighbors to the north and south, to Canada and Mexico. How much of this has been bargaining and negotiation, and how much do you expect to see implemented in the early days of the new term?
I think it's a mix of both. If you're the Canadian public, you're probably happy that Justin Trudeau made that trip to Mar-a-Lago to have dinner with Trump a couple weeks ago, because he's trying to reestablish that personal relationship with the incoming president. And he's trying to say, hey, we don't actually send many drugs. We don't, a fraction of illegal immigrants come from Canada versus Mexico. And the Mexican leader didn't make a similar trip. And so just like in all parts of life, negotiations are much better face to face. And Trump had some fun in terms of asking Trudeau, maybe Canada can avoid these tariffs by being the 51st state of America. And so he continues to talk about that to this day. And so I think that he has to balance his desire to get America back on a freer trade deal with all of these countries, but also not tank the economy, just like deporting lots of immigrants, because he ran on an issue like inflation. And if the economy takes a downturn because you have these huge tariffs, then that would be bad news for him and Republicans in the midterm elections in 2026.
All right, we're going to come back. David, I'm going to ask you about the economy under Donald Trump, and I'm going to ask all of you to put on your thinking caps, because I'm going to quiz you on who's likely to be the first foreign leader to get a state visit under Donald Trump. We'll talk about all these issues and more in just a moment. All right, we're back with our guests talking about what 2025 is going to look like. David, when the year ends, 2025, how is the economy going to look? Are people going to look back and say, wow, thank God Donald Trump ended inflation and spurred growth? Or are they going to say, oh my God, it's even worse than I thought?
Oh, those aren't the only two choices, but that would be fun to just pick one. Well, I think the incoming president himself has made some interesting rhetorical moves to try and tamp down our expectations. As he is only too happy to tell you at every opportunity, he is once again the so-called Man of the Year of Time Magazine. What was once sort of one of the premier honors in all of media was to be named the most important newsmaker of the year by a news magazine. News magazines are so 20th century, but still he thinks it's really important. Anyway, he gives this interview with Time Magazine in which he really lowers expectations and said, well, egg prices and food prices, once they go up, it's hard to bring them down. This is the absolutely antithesis of what he said during the campaign. So, inflation is not going to be reversed, which is sort of what he was saying on the campaign trail, that somehow the price of avocados and eggs and butter is going to be down where it was 4 years ago. That's not going to happen. Are tariffs potentially inflationary? I think so. I think when I went to class, I was led to believe that if you put an extra cost on goods and services coming into the U.S., they're going to be more expensive to the consumer. So it seems the situation seems ripe for kind of a topsy-turvy economy. So I'll predict topsy-turviness at the end of 2025.
Topsy-turviness. All right. We'll remember that. Okay. Let's turn to a couple of foreign policy questions. Donald Trump has said that he wants wars to end. He's actually said he wants them to end by time he takes office. I'm not quite sure all that is going to happen. But when you look at Europe and you look at the Middle East, is he likely to get his wish? Anna, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly facing a lot of pressure from Republicans not to let Ukraine become the next Afghanistan, something that continues to go on and on. But I think even in the United States, you look at the southern border, we're certainly not in war with Mexico, but the new Mexican president, Claudia Sheinbaum, is very progressive. And I'm told behind closed doors is a huge, I should say, not a fan of Trump hugely. And so that could make things more complicated for getting under control the drug war, the human smuggling, and trafficking at the southern border. Really, Mexico has a lot of support with the tariffs that they could play to the U.S., but President Trump's focus is abroad right now on those two wars, but he also needs to be focusing on what's going on at this, south of our border here.
And Daniel, do you think that Donald Trump is going to succeed in bringing the war to Ukraine to an early end?
I think it'll probably be earlier than it would have been with Kamala Harris, who was kind of promising a blank check, was not talking about negotiating with Putin. Trump views himself as the top negotiator the world has ever seen, and so that he can create a deal with Ukraine and Russia pretty quickly. But to a lot of foreign policy old hands in Washington, that reads as basically forcing the Ukrainians to sue for peace and kind of letting Russia rebuild their military for the next few years and try again in a couple years. And so he's also going to face a tough sell in the Middle East in terms of a ceasefire in Gaza, because Netanyahu, the Israeli leader, he wants to keep Israeli troops in Gaza and does not want to have a Arab force, particularly, or the Palestinian Authority take control of that disputed territory. And so we're likely to see kind of a low ebb war there for a while. And I think what will be interesting is how do Arab American voters respond to that, because they dealt Joe Biden and Harris a blow by turning more in smaller numbers to Trump, because they were mad that Biden had supported Israel so much in the last year and change.
David, during President-elect Trump's first term, he had a bit of what can call a bromance with the leader of North Korea, going back and forth, exchanging letters, having a high-level summit. Are we going to see this again, or is there some other foreign leader of a isolated terrorist-supporting country that the president is likely to try to reach out to?
Gosh, it's funny. You haven't heard of Little Rocket Man, as Trump famously called Kim Jong-un in his first term. He hasn't been in the news much during the transition. What other isolated foreign leaders are out there for sort of a wild hair move by Donald Trump? I don't think so. I've actually queued up my prediction for the first state visitor. If you want that now, I think.
Oh, okay. Well, let's go to that.
Totally opposite direction.
I'm going to get the first state visit, David.
King Charles of Great Britain. Donald Trump is obsessed with the British royal family. He feels in some ways that they have been a rival for his attention in the New York tabloids and in sort of the pop culture. He really seems to be fascinated with royalty. King Charles is King Charles is battling cancer. He's only been king for a few years, and I'm going to bet that Donald Trump wants to bask in some British royal glow and presumably get maybe the young Prince of Wales, the king's son, who Trump almost sort of flirted with at the reopening of Notre Dame a few weeks ago, and maybe the Prince of Wales' wife, the famous Kate Middleton, get her to come. I think that's the way he's going to. I think that's what state dinners are going to look like in Trump too.
Okay, well, as long as we're on it, Anna, do you have a candidate for first state visit?
Yeah, I have a long shot. Chinese President Xi Jinping. I think, as much as Donald Trump has demonized China over the coronavirus and for countless other ways through the years, I think he's ready to do business. And I think, President Jinping understands that, face-to-face meetings are the best way to do that. And certainly there are things that the U.S. and China have to work on, including the fentanyl epidemic still raging. So I would not be surprised to see him come across the ocean.
Okay. And Daniel, do you have a candidate?
Well, one thing on President Xi is that Trump actually invited him to the inauguration. And I think it was a bridge too far for someone like Xi, who is not the biggest fan of democracy. So he turned it down. He thought it would be a little hypocritical, given that he doesn't really allow free elections in his country. I think that it's a kind of a toss-up between Macron, who Trump, has this a famous bromance as well, although they sometimes squabble. So they're kind of like, sibling rivalry, but also Netanyahu, who he has an affinity for. And he's even put his daughter's father-in-law as one of his top Middle East advisors, and one of his closest friends, Steve Witkoff, as the envoy to the Middle East, because he wants to have more Abraham Accords. And if he can get a state visit and have normalization with Saudi Arabia, that would be quite a crowning achievement for his.
Okay,
legacy.
These are all three fascinating candidates. For what it's worth, I'll throw the leader of Hungary into the mix. After all, Hungary was praised by the president during his debate. So I want to thank you all, Anna Giratelli, David Hawkins, and Daniel Lippman, for helping look into the future and see what 2025 will be like here in America. Thank you for joining me on داخل واشنطن. وبهذا تنتهي هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أسئلة أو تعليقات حول موضوع هذه الحلقة، خاصة فيما يتعلق بأهم التغيرات في السياسة في إدارة ترامب الثانية، أرجو التواصل معي عبر تويتر على هاشتاج Inside Washington أو مباشرة @RobSatloff. وإلى أن أراكم الأسبوع المقبل، شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.